Welcome to an MTSS overview for administrators. My name is Tanya Morret, and I am the Training and Consultation Supervisor for IU12. There you can see my Twitter information and my contact information if you have any questions. Our objectives for this short session are very simple. First, we're going to unpack MTSS components. And of course, MTSS stands for Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. Secondly, I hope to end with dispelling some misunderstandings around what MTSS is and is not. Let's get started. First and foremost, MTSS is a problem-solving model. It doesn't matter what the issue is, it starts with defining a problem. Do you have an issue with third grade students in literacy? Or maybe ninth grade students in attendance? Do you have a discipline issue that seems to be on the rise in a particular area? Maybe it's in the cafeteria. No matter what the problem is, you're going to use data to analyze it to try and determine why is it occurring. And then you're going to offer solutions. What are we going to do about it? This is often where most plans fall apart. We offer solutions, but we don't monitor those solutions to determine, is it working? And so the final piece of this, closing the loop, is to evaluate whether or not our solution is effective. The solutions may range in minimal changes or tweaks or adjustments in our core, what we provide to everybody. They might be slightly more than what we're already offering, in which case we may refer to that as supplemental support, or they may be interventions that are very intensive and require more expertise, time, frequency, resources, smaller group, and therefore we would label that as the most intensive support. You've probably heard it referred to as a tiered system. But I want to break down those tiers for a second. Tier 1. What do all students need? And we can guarantee that all students will have access to. And since we're talking about all students, our solution lies in what can we all do to support all students. Now, we might not all be doing the same thing, but we all in a school have a vested interest in students achieving. Unfortunately, that's not enough for some students, and so then we go to Tier 2. And hopefully our numbers are small enough that we're only looking at some students. So what do some students need? But we don't want to fall into the trap of thinking that what some students need, only some teachers can provide, because it really is a coordinated effort. We all may have a different role in this, but what is it we are all going to do to support those some students? And then finally, there's that very small group, that few students whose needs are so great that they need complex, individualized solutions. And those solutions are likely going to need more than just one person supporting. So again, if we're thinking about this in terms of how can we all do our part, what is it that each of us will do in order to contribute to the success of those few? It may be simply most of us are going to continue to provide a guaranteed Tier 1 access, without which those few students don't have that foundational piece. But this system needs to work all together. It began as a behavioral system, and it was fashioned after a medical model. If you think about, going to the doctor on a regular basis and having them looking at information and really looking for concerning patterns in the information that's collected. The behavioral system works off the premise that if we build a pro-social, preventative, universal framework, we are going to meet the needs of most of our students. That translated into an academic approach. If we provide a high-quality core instruction, we're going to give all students access to the best initial instruction possible, and we're likely going to prevent more students from needing something in addition to the core. Now you see some percentages here, and you've probably heard those before. But when we get to a point where our MTSS framework is fully functioning at its optimal level, we should be able to meet the needs of 80 to 90% of our students just through Tier 1. Because that's what schools were designed to do, was provide Tier 1 instruction, right? Over the years, we've recognized that students have needed more, and we've layered in supports, things like special education, or we've layered in differentiation, but in a more haphazard manner. When we're looking at this from an MTSS approach, when that 80 to 90% needs are being met, we should only have between 5 and 15% who need a little bit more. And the goal is not a little bit more for a long time. The goal is a little bit more to hurry up and get them back on track. It's our Tier 3 kiddos who are going to take much more intensive supports, much more time, much more frequency, maybe a more narrowed intervention approach, maybe a person with more expertise to help them catch up. You're seeing me go back and forth between this idea of Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, and core support and advanced support. What you need to know is there's no magic line that says, oh, this is no longer Tier 1 and now it's Tier 2, except when it comes to access. Who has access? We guarantee access at Tier 1. It's when we get to Tier 2 and Tier 3 that we're not necessarily guaranteeing access, and we're making decisions based on student need and degree of need. And in order to make those decisions, we need all 6 of these critical PA components working in concert. And so we're going to talk about them individually. The first one being leadership. Shared leadership, shared responsibility is key. It starts at the building level, and it starts with the building level leadership team, right? And that leadership team is really making the decisions for the building. Usually around this time of year, we have lots of changes that occur to our faculty and our administration. And what we don't want to run the risk is if by losing one person from that leadership team, the team falls apart. They need to be able to function no matter who comes and goes. So that leadership team at the building level, we recommend about 6 to 8 people. And you'll see here from this list that there needs to be a leader, right? An administrative point of contact. But you also need folks who are knowledgeable about behavior. So a counselor or school psychologist who may also double as a member of the PBIS team. Special education representative who understands what supports are out there and what the trends look like and what are the students receiving. You need somebody who's really knowledgeable about literacy and math and behavior specifically within that building so that they can determine whether or not access to Tier 1 is happening or fidelity to Tier 2 and 3 supports are occurring. And then finally, you need your general education teachers. Somebody who's knowledgeable about literacy and somebody who's knowledgeable about math. Now this makeup is regardless if you're elementary or secondary. But I will tell you that at the elementary level, you want to make sure you have equal representation of primary and intermediate teachers. At the middle school, you may want to consider front-loading your leadership team with teachers who are teaching the lowest grade of students in the building, because you'll want to build it from that point up. And the same would hold true at the high school. So you may be considering 9th grade general ed teachers to begin with. And then as you build your system, you would add additional members to the team who might be knowledgeable about other grade levels. You really want to watch this team getting too big, so it doesn't hurt to have one person have multiple credentials. So maybe you have a general education person who is deeply knowledgeable about the interventions that are available in literacy, or a special education representative who was once a general ed teacher in that building. But leadership in the building is just the first part of that shared responsibility. Eventually, you're going to want to build the capacity of your entire building. So while you have a leadership team making the decisions, ultimately every teacher, every paraprofessional within the building, whether they teach content or fine and applied arts, etc., are all going to have a place in this framework. And it starts with instruction, right? What are we guaranteeing access for all students? And when what we guarantee for everyone is not enough, what are we going to offer in addition to that guarantee for some and for a few? And what changes, right? The level of intensity could be the amount of time we're providing that adjustment or intervention, the focus, whether, something like comprehension, which is big and complex, or something discrete like decoding, and what kind of intervention or instruction are we putting into place. At the core level, we might be talking about instructional tweaks and evidence-based strategies. But we might also be talking about, at the more advanced level, some standardized protocol interventions that we know, if we follow with fidelity, are likely to produce very specific results. But it all starts with the core, because without that foundational core, we're going to have too many students who have not had access to good, high-quality core instruction and who are going to have gaps in their understanding. And so when we think about core, we think about evidence-based instructional strategies that support a standards-aligned system. And those variations in learners, because they learn at different rates, requires differentiation. And from an administrative approach, we need to make sure we're modeling fidelity of instruction. What we have said needs to be taught is being taught, and is being taught in a way that we have found to be effective. And in addition to that, we've attempted to reduce the barriers that students may come across when they're learning. So we've provided supports that help them access their acquiring knowledge, processing knowledge, or expressing knowledge. And that we keep the challenges and high expectations up for all students, but we also provide support so that they can meet those challenges and meet those high expectations. But we know that's not always enough. And so how do we make a decision about who gets what additional support? That happens through a very systematic problem-solving process at the core of which is data evaluation. Right? We need to have data to make the decisions. Without data, it's just an opinion. So in the most simplest of terms, we need a process that's out there looking for students who aren't on track to where they need to be. At the elementary level, we're hoping that every student, as they enter a new grade level, they are on track to reach the end of grade level expectations within the 188 or so days that we have them in our classrooms. At the secondary level, right, we're upping the ante a little bit, or a lot, I should say, because we want students to be on track to graduate and on track to achieve post-positive secondary outcomes. So this universal screening process is designed to find the students who aren't on track. And they might not be on track because of academic reasons, behavioral, social, emotional reasons, And therefore, we need to make modifications that will get them back on the right trajectory. When I work with school teams, oftentimes they'll use the term universal screener. This is a pretty big task we've set for ourselves, to rely on any one single data point. And so as we work with your school, we're going to work with helping you identify the most valid and reliable data points that are going to help you make your decisions. The process is going to look something like this. We're going to take all students from a grade level or a content area. We're going to look at data, the same data on all of those students, and we're going to put them into this big funnel and identify what the target is. What's the target at this point in time that tells us this student is on track? And for those students who are most discrepant and most off track, they have the biggest needs, they get stuck first. We're going to triage them first. They're our 911ers. There are going to be other students who have lesser needs and might get a little further down in the funnel. And really, with lesser needs means lesser intensive levels of support, right? So our students with the biggest needs, we might even need more assessment. Our students with less significant needs, we might be able to figure out what it is that they need and get them caught up quickly. But ideally, we want 80 to 90% of our students not getting caught in the funnel, moving all the way through, because their treatment is good core instruction. It means our core is working, doing the job it needs to, and we just need to keep it going. At the elementary level, there are lots of different measures in reading, math, and behavior that we can look at that will help inform this universal screening process. Some data we look at once and done. E-metric and PVOS, right? We only collect that once a year, and by the time we actually get a chance to look at it, there's almost a whole quarter of instruction that has occurred. So we need to look at that data in connection with more real-time data, so more benchmark assessments. And so we've put a couple in there for you to consider, but know that there are still others, and this list is not exhaustive. But the shift occurs in middle school away from just math, literacy, and behavior, and now we layer in attendance. And through a longitudinal look, we know that something as simple as one suspension can impact the likelihood that a student is actually going to graduate. Just with one suspension. This longitudinal study looked at 25,000 students. And of those 133,000. And of those 133,000, 25,000 had one suspension. And that doubled their likelihood that they were going to drop out from 16% to 32%. When we look at attendance, right, we generally want to see students who are 95% or higher in attendance. Dropping just below that, 90 to 94%, still within that 10% general target area, can increase the likelihood of them dropping out to 1 in 4. Separate from behavior and attendance, looking just at course performance. In a group of 93,000 students, 18,000 had one failure. Those 18,000 jumped from an 8% likelihood of dropping out to 23%. The outcomes for the combination of any of these three are horrific. So we need to put thresholds in place that we monitor in behavior, attendance, and course performance that will help us catch these students before they fail. And so at the secondary level, we call that an early warning system. It's actually an early warning system in elementary as well, but the stakes are much more urgent at the secondary level because we just don't have as much time. And so we'll look at what we refer to as ABC data, attendance, behavior, and course performance. And first, we'll look to see what can we adjust in the core to potentially help this student be more successful. But just like we talked about in that funnel for elementary, That's not likely going to be enough for all of our students. So how are we going to make more intensive, advanced support decisions? And what does that look like? This process needs to be documented. And so communication and collaboration are key. We need to designate teams who are going to do the work of specific groups of students. And so in any building, it starts with the building level leadership. And we recommend that they meet at least once a month, especially in the beginning, around data, around all levels of data, so they can monitor how things are progressing for our grade level or content teams. Those grade level or content teams at the elementary level, more grade level teams, may meet up to 2 times a month, maybe even 4 times a month, once a week. And then as students get older at the secondary level, they may meet fewer times in a month. But what is not different between the 2 levels are interventions. When we make an instructional adjustment, we can't make an instructional adjustment and walk away and come back a month or 2 later and say, how did it work? We need to monitor it. And so intervention level teams work best when they meet once a week. These are not all the same groups of teachers, although you will see overlap between building and grade level and intervention. But collaboration and communication is key. And not just between each other. We need to have a family-school partnership. How are we engaging our families in this process? I know not all families will engage, but that doesn't mean we don't stop trying. So there's lots of pieces to this MTSS framework. There are a lot of terms that I may have introduced to you, and you might be saying to yourself, I'm not aware of that, or I don't understand that, or that's new to me. There's a lot of capacity building that goes on in development of an MTSS framework. This is easily a 5-year plan to put in place the infrastructure you need, which is the professional learning that needs to happen for your staff, the structures, the schedule, the instruction, the monitoring of fidelity of instruction and intervention. All those pieces take time to build. And so sometimes it feels like this. But that's why you have us. At the Lincoln Intermediate Unit next year, for all of our new teams, we are taking on a 3-pronged approach. One that works just specifically with the MTSS building level leadership team. We have 3 days set aside throughout the year where we're going to invite you to the IU or through a hybrid approach to really dig in to topics that the building level leadership team needs to understand. The leadership team can't be in all places at all times, and so you need to start thinking right away about how are we going to build out this capacity building. And so we're going to ask the building level leadership team to consider what other teacher leaders are in your building that can start to lead or champion academics, behavior, inclusive practices. And we're going to offer MTSS network meetings 3 times a year for those designated personnel to come and engage with others who are doing the same work around continuous improvement and data literacy. And then finally, those 3 days that we work with the leadership team, we're not going to get all the work done during those 3 days. We need to keep at the work. We need to keep it in front of us in a consistent manner. And so we're going to invite you to schedule monthly on-site meetings with your TAC point of contact. We're thinking 90 minutes would be great if we can get 90 minutes with your leadership team once a month. In between the months we have our big leadership series, we will co-construct an agenda that will take into account what we feel we need to make sure we address based on our syllabus and what your needs assessment has identified that you need to continue to make a priority. If you want to know more about any one of these 3, MTSS summary card link is in your slide deck, and you can look to see what the dates are and what this process looks like and the topics we're going to address. So hopefully you have a cursory understanding of what MTSS is. But let's take a minute to talk about what it is not. It's not a program. You can't go buy it. It's also not a program in a sense that it's going to look the same in every building, because the students that we have in each building are not the same. And our framework is built around the needs of our students and the populations of students we have in our buildings. It's not a pre-referral system for special education. There are 13 different disability categories. Eventually, if you apply for the state approval, you may be able to use your MTSS framework in place of a discrepancy model only for a specific learning disability in math or literacy, so reading or writing. But in terms of the other disability categories, MTSS can only support those students, but it can't take the place of the referral system. And truly, as you're building this framework, that's not why we're building it. We're actually building it to reduce the number of students eventually that are referred. It is not just for struggling students. Our struggling students are most often at risk for achieving, but they could also be at risk for growing if we're not putting instruction or intervention in place to catch them up. But our advanced students, even our proficient students, they could be at risk for not growing. And because we're relying too much on the supports that we're putting in place, and we're slowing things down too much for those proficient and advanced learners. So we need to make sure we're using data and instruction and communication and collaboration to make sure all students are supported. It is also not in conflict with other initiatives that are critical to the success of a school and a district. Things like comprehensive planning, school improvement planning, and evidence-based practices. In fact, it couldn't be a more perfect partner for these three initiatives. So I've given you a lot to think about, and at this point, you may have questions. I would encourage you to use the link in your slide deck, as well as reference the materials, the links that I've included in the email. You may want to check some things out and do your own kind of initial research. Feel free to ask any questions at this link, and these will be the basis for our conversation when I join you this summer. Thank you so much. Have a great day.